With this video, I'm going to walk you through how you can use the structure to determine the genre and purpose of a text. Really, our focus is going to be how we can use the structure to get to the purpose. We know that when we're talking about purpose, we're talking about the reason why the author wrote the text. When we talk about structure, we're talking about things like the text features or the organization of the article, the order that things come in. If we look at the structure and we look at the order that details are presented, usually we can get to this purpose. It's by looking at the smaller details that we get to the big why behind them. So when we look at this graphic, it can be a little bit overwhelming. There's a lot of information here. But because we're looking at the overall purpose of the whole article, we're looking here and here at these two columns. So if we're looking at just these two columns, we know that if we're looking for the generic purpose of the text, we're looking for persuasion, information, informativeness, persuade, inform, or entertain, right? We are prepared to say whether an article is persuasive, informative, or entertaining. But the way that we get there is by looking specifically at the details in the organization that they include. So what organization or order is the author presenting ideas, and how does this show us that they're actually being persuasive, informative, or entertaining? We're going to use author's purpose verbs like to show, to describe, to explain, to emphasize, so that we can get to our point even stronger. We're also going to focus more closely on smaller details. So instead of just saying that the author wrote this to inform or entertain, we're going to elaborate by saying things like the author wrote this to show the reader how astronauts got to space. Or an example from another text, the author wrote this to emphasize the importance of being brave. By using a stronger description like this, we can usually get to the bigger purpose, and we'll be able to prove it very well because we've looked so closely at the details. I'm going to show you what I mean in our NASA SpaceX article. So this is the article that you looked through yesterday, and you've already annotated for comprehension, meaning you already know what this article is about. So today we're going to look at why this author presented these text features in the order he or she did. So what is the reason behind each of these text features, and how do they help the reader? That's going to be purpose. So when I look at the very first thing on the page and I see this title, SpaceX launches first astronauts for NASA on test flight, this shows me what the topic is. This shows me that SpaceX and NASA launched a mission. It may seem kind of repetitive to say that, but that's the purpose for this title. This is why this title is here, is to show what the article is going to be about. Now I look at the picture and I ask myself, why is this first picture right here? Oops. Well, we've told the reader that SpaceX and NASA launched a mission. Now we should show them what that looked like. So this image shows the takeoff of the flight launched by SpaceX and NASA. Then we get into our first section. We need to ask, why is this section here? How does this section help the reader? I'm going to add that here. How does this help? And you're always going to answer this with verbs, such as explain, or shows, or elaborates, and so on. So we look at this first section and we think, how does this help the reader? Well, this helps the reader because it explains that now SpaceX is able to send people into space, not just NASA. And we know that because we know what this section is about from our reading yesterday. Then we look at the next subtitle, and we ask, how does this help the reader? Thanks for a great ride to space. This helps the reader because it introduces the next section. It shows that the next section will include the astronaut's positive response. It kind of gives a preview to the next section. That's why it's a subtitle. I go on and I think about what this section was about. I know that it was about the process between SpaceX and NASA, and I know that from my reading yesterday. We know it was about their partnership. So I think, how does this help the reader? Well, it shows that NASA created a need for private companies like SpaceX to step up and send people to the moon. Then I see this image of the two astronauts smiling, and I think, how does this help the reader? This helps the reader because the smiles on the astronauts' faces show that the space launch was a success. This is going to help the reader understand the author's point of view that this partnership was a positive thing. I see my next subtitle, Final Test Before Approval for Human Spaceflight. I need to ask, how does this subtitle help the reader? It helps the reader because it tells the reader what the next section is going to be about. It's going to be about that final test, which we know from our reading is Demo 2. So this subtitle helps the reader because it introduces the final test, Demo 2, which is explained in the next section. When I ask my question here, how does this section help the reader? Well, it helps the reader understand because it elaborates on the final test, Demo 2, and explains what the test day was like for SpaceX, NASA, and the people involved. Our last subtitle, Countdown Clock Starts. How does this help the reader? It shows that the next section will be about the actual space shuttle launch. The countdown clock has started, and they're going to actually get to the launch part of the article. So it shows that the next section will talk about the actual space shuttle launch. And finally, how does this section help the reader? It helps the reader because it gives more information about what will happen next for the astronauts in space, what they will do, where they will go, and how long they will be there. So when I look at the reason for all of these text features and the order in which the author introduced them, I see that much of the details are helping the reader understand something. The author is explaining, or the author is showing that it was a success. The author is showing this need for a partnership between NASA and SpaceX. The author is explaining what Demo 2 is. So there's a lot of explanation going on here, and the purpose for a lot of these text features are to help the reader understand something. That shows me that the author probably wrote this article to inform people about the positive relationship between SpaceX and NASA, and to report information about the successful launch earlier that week, the week before this article was published. So I've used the organization of the whole article to get to the reason behind writing the article. In this way, I've used the organization to show the purpose.